Welcome to the channel where powerful stories come to life. Get ready for truth, emotion, and transformation. 1 story at a time. There are still people who believe talent has a color, knowledge wears a suit, and respect is only given to those with a badge hanging around their neck. But what if I told you that one of the greatest stories of resilience, music, and awareness began with a challenge disguised as a joke? Clara, a black woman, entered a prestigious music conservatory just to accompany her daughter. But because of her simple appearance, she was mistaken for a janitor and humiliated by professors, who sarcastically dared her to play one of the most difficult classical pieces. What they didn't know: Clara was a former virtuoso of European concert halls, and in just a few minutes she didn't just dismantle prejudice with her fingertips. She became the symbol of a silent revolution that shook the foundations of one of the most elitist environments in music education. This isn't just a story about talent. It's one of those stories that provoke, move, and make you question. How many Claras have been ignored around us? And how many more will be if nothing changes? Clara arrived early that day, walking calmly, just wanting to accompany her daughter. She dressed simply, like someone who has nothing to prove. But in that conservatory, appearance spoke louder than intention. And that's where one of those unforgettable stories began. Mistaken for a cleaning lady, she was mocked by professors who, with cynical smiles, challenged her to play a complex piece, not as an invitation, but a trap, as if her silence meant ignorance. What many still don't understand is that prejudice rarely shouts. It whispers, disguised as a joke, a test, a curiosity. And there, in one of the country's most renowned music institutions, prejudice wore a tie and held a music sheet. How many times have you seen this? Maybe at the office when someone is doubted just for not speaking fluent English, or at school when the quietest student is overlooked. Stories like this show that arrogance doesn't need a megaphone, just an opening. And here's the thing: sometimes the world underestimates you just to see if you'll give up. It's like that African proverb that says, if you're not invited to the table, bring your own chair. Clara brought more than that. She brought courage, and while muffled laughter echoed in the room, she simply nodded slightly. But in that silent gesture, the next page of one of those life-changing stories was already being written. Clara sat at the piano with the calm of someone who has already won invisible battles. No one there knew she had once played in Europe's finest halls, before trading applause for diapers, spotlights for her daughter's school notebooks. Her life was one of those stories most only discover after the final curtain. She didn't leave the stage for lack of talent, but out of love. And while many measure success by medals, Clara knew a glory that doesn't fit on a resume. Her smile as she accepted the challenge wasn't one of someone trying to prove herself, but of someone who already knew her worth. Still, it's curious how the world tends to dismiss what it doesn't understand. How many people do you know with dormant gifts buried by need or circumstance? Brilliant people who gave up dreams to care for a loved one, to pay the bills, or simply because no one believed in them. And that's where the most powerful stories live, in choices made with heart. Here's the part few talk about. Talent doesn't fade with time. It just waits for the right moment to breathe again. Clara knew that. And in that conservatory, surrounded by doubting eyes, she didn't see enemies. She saw a stage. The same stage that had once been rightfully hers, and now returned, as if to say, shall we begin again? Because every great story has a turning point, and hers was about to unfold. Silence was immediate. As soon as Clara touched the first note, everything around seemed to stop. No more sarcasm, no more whispers, only reverent, almost hypnotized attention. Her fingers glided with the ease of someone conversing with the instrument, and in that moment it became clear. What she held wasn't just technique, it was soul. One of those stories that unfolds without a single word, yet says everything. As professors exchanged uneasy glances, students already knew they were witnessing something rare. The most interesting part? True talent doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need a degree on the wall or anyone's validation. It simply stands on its own. Clara played like someone revealing ancient secrets, like someone turning sound into emotion. And that can't be taught. With every note, she dismantled the prejudice set against her. Have you noticed? Sometimes life hands you the very situation meant to break you, just to let you shine even brighter. These are stories that begin with humiliation and end in legacy. And that's when a student pulled out his phone, started recording, maybe without even knowing he was capturing history. This was more than a performance. It was a life lesson disguised as music. Funny how the deepest revolutions don't come from fiery speeches, but from a melody that silences even the harshest judgment. And that video, still unknown, was about to launch the next chapter of this story. Within 24 hours, the video had spread like wildfire. No one knew her name, but everyone asked, "Who is this woman who silenced a conservatory with her hands?" The student's caption was simple, almost innocent. "The lady who schooled the teachers." But the impact was massive. Those images crossed social media bubbles, timelines, and borders. Because some stories need no caption, only truth. And when truth appears, no reputation can hide it. The comments were flooded with other Claras. Invisible people, ignored, constantly tested. People who saw in that performance a mirror of what they live at work, in schools and hospitals. Because when prejudice is exposed, it screams louder than any argument. And that video became just that. A scream of awareness in the form of a piano. A reminder that the greatest masters don't always wear coats and ties. Many were shocked by the response. But the truth is, the world is hungry for stories that are real, human, and make us feel something. And Clara, without seeking fame, became a symbol. Not because she chased the spotlight, but because she turned a setup into a testimony. And soon came the public demands. Because if her talent had been ignored due to prejudice, how many others have been too? And what would the conservatory do about it? The pressure was immediate and fair. Former students spoke out, social movements got involved, even ex-professors showed solidarity. The conservatory, once sitting atop a pedestal of prestige, had to come down, because this wasn't just about ignored talent. It was about an entire system that needed to learn how to listen. And when a story like this explodes, even the most resistant must reassess. The administration first tried to downplay it, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But the internet doesn't forget, and Clara's talent couldn't be hidden. Facing public pressure, they responded. A scholarship program was created for Black and underprivileged talents, along with mandatory empathy and diversity training. It wasn't charity, it was correction. And more than that, it was an acknowledgement that rigid structures need reform too. Ironically, many saw this change as the start of a new era. After all, how many conservatories still shut their doors to those without European last names or international diplomas? How many stories are lost because of social filters? Clara didn't just play a piece. She sparked a movement. And amid that wave, a question began to rise among the students. What if this woman could teach more than music? That question became an invitation. And the invitation? A new chapter. Clara was asked to join the faculty, not as a technique instructor, but as a mentor in life, awareness, and presence. The woman once mocked was now a reference. Her mere presence in the halls caused reflective silences. Because certain stories need no introduction, their presence carries the entire plot. In her first class, she didn't start with sheet music. She didn't ask for silence. She simply looked at the students and said, with the serenity of someone who has seen the world from many angles, "Before judging a note, learn to listen to the soul." It was a jolt. Some laughed. Others swallowed hard. But from then on, it became clear. Music, like life, demands deep listening. And Clara, with her calm and direct style, opened the eyes of an entire generation that had never seen someone like her in that place. And the most beautiful part? Seeing the impact on Black female students. For the first time, many saw themselves represented in that space, no longer as exceptions, but as possibilities. Clara's presence proved that talent comes in many forms, and the most inspiring stories are those that face exclusion and still rise to teach. But this quiet revolution was only beginning, and the conservatory still had something to say. The ceremony was simple, yet symbolic. On the stage where Clara was once mocked now stood the conservatory's director, holding a microphone, shame written across his face. "We made a mistake, and we learned from it." Those words echoed through the packed auditorium. The public apology was direct, necessary, because some stories only begin to heal when there's humility to admit the wound. Some professors involved in the initial provocation also spoke, not to make excuses, but to express remorse. One of them, visibly emotional, admitted, "In minutes I learned more from her than in years of teaching." And that says a lot, because apologizing isn't weakness, it's growth. And when a place of power has the courage to make amends, It begins to create space for other stories to flourish. But the most touching moment came from the audience. People crying, applauding, holding signs of support. Many hadn't known Clara before that video. Now, they felt they were witnessing a turning point. Because the apology wasn't just for her, it was for everyone who's ever been underestimated. And there, in that ceremony, another door was opening. Clara's daughter was the last to speak that day. With teary eyes, she simply said, "My mother changed my life, and now she's changing the world." It was the kind of phrase that silences any room, that bypasses defenses and goes straight to the heart. That wasn't just admiration. It was the reflection of a seed well planted, nurtured with love, struggle, and dignity. Because when someone is capable of turning humiliation into inspiration, they're not just living a story, they're generating other stories all around, quietly blooming one by one. And that's exactly what happened. In the halls of the conservatory, the atmosphere had changed. It was as if something invisible had been shattered, as if an old layer of judgment had been peeled from the air. Other black students began to stand taller, to dream bigger, to step into spaces that once felt unreachable. Female professors who had previously stayed silent were now speaking out against veiled acts of discrimination. Emotional stories began to emerge in conversations and on social media. Girls who had been about to quit the program now said they were determined to finish. All of this because of a woman who, for a moment, had been treated as invisible, and who chose, with grace and strength, to prove that she was very much present. That's how revolutions begin, when someone refuses to accept the narrative they've been assigned. Clara didn't ask for a stage. She didn't seek an audience. But her gesture was so genuine, it became undeniable. A story like that doesn't stay quiet. It echoes. And the most beautiful part is that she didn't use bitterness as fuel, but sensitivity. She didn't shout, she played, and every note from her piano seemed to say, "I am more than you can see." And that changed everything. Over time, Clara was invited to give lectures, interviews, and speak at forums on education, inclusion, and ethics. And wherever she went, she carried the same calm gaze and the phrase that had become her motto: never underestimate the power of a soul in silence. Because the stories that change the world aren't made only of spotlights and applause. They're built from presence, from truth, from the courage to be who you are, even when no one's watching. She didn't hand out ready-made lessons. She asked questions. She played without a score. She spoke with those no one else listened to. At a conference on diversity and leadership, when asked how she dealt with the humiliation at the conservatory, she responded with disarming simplicity, "I just did what my mother would have done. I took a deep breath, kept my head up, and let the truth do its work." That answer created a silence more powerful than any applause, because some stories don't need volume, they just need space. In the following months, the conservatory restructured its evaluation process, opened new scholarships for underprivileged students, and established a permanent active listening program focused on empathy and inclusion. It wasn't a miracle, it was a consequence. Clara became a symbol, but she never stopped being human. She still took her daughter to class, carried her notebook, and smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who knows both the weight and the value of a long journey. What no one expected was what came next. A national education network invited Clara to lead a musical education project in underserved communities. She hesitated, of course. She believed her place was there, with her daughter. But her daughter, the same one who had witnessed her being humiliated and then applauded, said, "Go, Mom. There are people out there who need your music." And just like that, one woman's gesture became a bridge for hundreds of other stories. In no time, the project took on a life of its own. Pianos were donated, teachers volunteered, communities came together. Boys and girls who had never even seen a conservatory began composing, creating, dreaming. A young girl named Luna, for example, wrote her first sonata inspired by Clara's performance. And at the bottom of the sheet music she wrote, "For the one who taught me that sound is also resistance." Clara, in turn, remained steady, humble, but now visibly more confident. In one of the project's inaugural classes, she asked the students, "What do you feel when no one believes in you?" The answers came in tears, confessions, lowered eyes. But then she added, "Now take that and use it to play, to compose, to transform." And it was as if each student realized that their pain could become art, and that art, when channeled with purpose, could change the world. Still, one final piece was missing to complete the journey, and it came in the form of an unexpected invitation. The same conservatory where it all began asked Clara to deliver the opening lecture for the new semester. A symbolic gesture, yes, but full of meaning. After all, it was the place that once tried to silence her, now asking to hear her voice. She accepted. She walked back into the auditorium with the same calm stride as always. But this time there were no suspicious stares, only respect. Clara didn't wear a name badge, nor did she flaunt any awards. She simply sat at the piano and said, "Today, I won't teach technique. I'll teach listening." And she played. Not a famous piece, not something meant to impress with its complexity. She played something of her own, a simple composition written at home during a sleepless night. And when she finished, she said, "This is how I turned what hurt me into something that heals me every day." Once again, the auditorium fell silent, a silence that spoke of change, of learning, of a new era opening, not just for music but for human relationships, for education, for the stories yet to be told. Because Clara's impact didn't lie in the force of her words, but in the clarity of her presence. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reconfiguring paradigms. And maybe that's the final point, or rather, the comma, of a narrative that continues to echo. Because every time someone is underestimated, every time someone is judged by what they wear instead of what they carry in their soul, may this story serve as a warning, a lighthouse, a reminder that no one is too small to make a big difference. And in the end, the greatest revolutions often begin like this, with a simple woman, a proud daughter, and a piano tuned by truth. What was supposed to be a simple visit to the conservatory became one of the most emblematic stories of our time, not just because of its symbolic power, but because of the real impact it had on so many lives. Clara, a black woman with a soft voice and a modest appearance, entered that space with no pretense. Her only goal was to accompany her daughter, who dreamed of studying there. But before she could even sit down, she was boxed in, as had happened so many times in her life, mistaken for cleaning staff, ignored by condescending glances, underestimated by those who only see the surface. There was no scandal, no shouting, just an ironic invitation, a provocation disguised as a test. "If you know so much about music, why not show us right now?" And she did. She sat at the piano like someone who knows that road intimately. Her fingers, firm and gentle, told a story no one expected to hear. They didn't just play, they transformed the space. Within minutes, prejudice crumbled, egos quieted, and a new perspective began to form on every face in the room. That performance wasn't just technical, it was a statement. Clara didn't want to prove anything, but ended up proving everything. She showed that genius doesn't shout, it whispers with grace, that talent doesn't wear a uniform, it has a soul, and that stories like hers, when given a voice, can heal wounds that society pretends not to see. It didn't take long for that moment to go viral. Someone recorded it, someone shared it, and soon Clara was everywhere, in the news, on social media, in debates. But the most powerful part wasn't the sudden fame, it was what it triggered. The conservatory, under public pressure, had to reflect. A space once ruled by a closed elite was being challenged. New auditions were created, open, accessible. The selection process stopped prioritizing resumes alone and started looking at life stories. Once untouchable professors were invited to take part in empathy and diversity training programs. And it all started because of one woman who didn't raise her voice but lifted her soul. Universities began to study the case. The episode was cited in national and international conferences. Theater groups turned it into a scene. Documentary filmmakers saw in it a living metaphor for the Brazil we want to build. A country where the stories of the invisible gain space, voice, and respect. But perhaps Clara's greatest achievement was her refusal to become a statue. Even after becoming a symbol, she insisted on being a bridge. In every interview, she repeated, "Don't look at me as the exception. Look around. There are so many like me, just waiting to be heard." And in fact, there were, and still are, women, men, young people and elders who carry gifts, talents, and remarkable worldviews, yet live on the margins because they don't fit the mold. Clara exposed how deeply aesthetic and racial bias still run through spaces that should be centered on knowledge and sensitivity, and she did so without confrontation or violence. Her weapon was art, her strategy was example, her motivation was love, for her daughter, for music, for justice. The changes weren't only institutional, They were human. Parents began to look at their children's dreams differently. Music students started to reevaluate their own prejudices. The same professors who had once looked down on Clara began to listen more, ask more, consider what they had previously ignored. And with every small gesture of openness, more stories began to bloom in that space. It was as if Clara had unlocked a new score, one that gave voice to the silence of many. In truth, what moved people the most wasn't Clara's technique, impressive as it was. It was her serenity, her dignity, the way she looked others in the eye, the way she said, "Go on, you can too," with a confidence that came from within, from someone who had already won invisible wars long before sitting at the piano. Yes, she became a symbol, but not an unreachable one, a possible one, a real one, just like us, but with the rare courage to reject the place others tried to confine her to. And that's the greatness of this story, because it doesn't end with applause and it begins with it. After that day, Clara returned to the conservatory a few more times, but not as a guest anymore. She was invited to give lectures, lead workshops, offer mentorship, and more than that, she became a reference for mothers, students, and educators who began to see art as a tool for equality. Her presence there no longer caused shock. It sparked hope. Today, years later, there's a scholarship in her name, a classroom named in her honor. Hundreds of students say they chose to pursue music because of her story. But Clara never wanted a monument. Her legacy is not a plaque, it's a bridge, a crossing between the world as it is and the world as it could be. Every time someone gives another person a chance, listens before judging, opens a door instead of building a wall, that story repeats itself. It takes on new versions, and continues. And the most beautiful part is realizing that Clara is not an exception. She's a mirror, a reflection of so many others who carry revolutions in their pockets, just waiting for a chance to play them into the world. Sometimes, all it takes is a piano, a moment of listening, a lack of judgment. Sometimes the change we so desperately seek is already there. It just needs silence to begin. So the next time you cross paths with someone who seems out of place, take a deep breath and listen. You might be standing in front of the next great story and not even know it yet. Now tell me with all honesty, how many stories have you missed because they didn't come in the right packaging? How many times have you looked at someone and, in less than 5 seconds, decided what they were, or worse, what they weren't? The truth, however uncomfortable, is that we learn to judge long before we learn to listen. Appearance becomes a filter. Tone of voice weighs more than content. Clothes speak louder than essence. And in the midst of all that noise, we miss the chance to witness powerful stories that just needed a bit of silence to bloom. Clara wasn't just a victim of that. She was a mirror. And what a powerful mirror she was. A black woman, simple, soft-spoken, and serenely present. Misjudged, underestimated, tested like a toy in the hands of those who never had to prove their worth to exist. But she didn't yell, didn't retaliate, didn't humiliate anyone in return. She sat at the piano and let her hands speak what words could never express with such truth. And what happened there, under arrogant gazes and mouths silenced by awe, was a lesson no university could teach. Greatness is not measured by titles. It reveals itself through posture, humility, and the courage to be whole where only halves were expected. But let's talk about us, because there's no use pointing fingers at others' mistakes if we keep repeating them daily, almost automatically. How many Claras pass through our lives unnoticed? How many talents do we ignore because they don't fit the ideal package? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's an invitation to reflect, because every time we choose not to listen, not to consider, not to give space, we help maintain a system that silences voices and erases paths. And then, no matter how loudly we say we're against prejudice, in practice, we reinforce it. Clara showed us that the answer doesn't always have to be confrontation. Sometimes the answer is excellence, that silent ability to realign the world with a gesture, a sound, an act. And that's not weakness. It's maturity. It's understanding that yelling doesn't always persuade, but touching deeply, that transforms. And that's exactly what she did. She transformed perspectives, minds, policies, even destinies, because her story didn't end with that performance. It became the starting point for many others that were suffocating in silence, waiting for courage to emerge. And you? Are you going to remain a spectator? Or will you start to act? Because true transformation doesn't happen in beautiful speeches or online outrage. It happens in active listening, in the willingness to take a second look, to ask before labeling, to welcome before excluding. The change you expect from the world might be waiting on you too, waiting for you to get out of autopilot, out of lazy judgment, and start paying attention to the stories that don't shout, but carry revolutions in how they behave, take a stand, and give themselves. And one more thing, no one said it would be easy. Unlearning patterns is a process. It's tiring. It challenges you, but it also sets you free. Because when you open space for the stories that were hidden, you begin to see beauty where you once saw suspicion. You begin to see power where you once saw threat. And you begin to realize that every human being, truly everyone, has something to teach you if you're willing to listen. This reflection doesn't end here. In fact, it only makes sense if it leaves the screen and enters your routine, if it becomes action. Because what happened with Clara could be happening right now, next to you, with someone you haven't even noticed. It might be the woman who serves your coffee every morning, the intern who rarely speaks in meetings, your neighbor, your rideshare driver, the cashier at the store. All of them have stories. And maybe, if you're open, you'll discover you're face-to-face with someone amazing, someone who just needed a stage, or at least someone willing to listen. So I ask you again, what will you do with this story? Let it be just another fleeting inspiration? Get emotional now and forget about it in 10 minutes? Or will you take action? Maybe it's time to reconsider who you automatically exclude, who you subconsciously underestimate. Maybe it's time to get off the bleachers and step onto the field. Because the world doesn't change on its own. It changes when we change too. And if this message stirred something inside you, here's my invitation. Share it. Comment. Tell your story, or the story of someone you saw being judged before their first note, before their first word, before their first chance. This channel exists for that, to give a stage to what's real, to what transforms, to what breaks molds and opens minds. Here, every video is more than content. It's a bridge, between worlds, between perspectives, between hearts. And every bridge needs people who help build it. So subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and above all, keep your ears and heart open. Because as long as there are people like Clara, and there are many out there, there will be stories worth telling, and you can be part of that change, not as a hero, but as someone who, instead of judging the cover, chooses to read the whole book. Because in the end, that's what truly changes the world. People who choose to see the invisible.